All right, up next we have Andrei Burago, who is going to be talking about one of those corners of grammar that's very, very important, but that I think many economists, including myself, would wish we could just sweep under the rug, which is verb control. If you don't know what verb control is, you will learn very, very soon. Here's Andrei.
I'll just try to walk you through the thought process. Basically, when I was constructing my languages, kind of, trying different things, and what I arrived at some verb control structures. Okay, that works better.
Yes,
okay, great. So what we start with is we have the verb and have lots of different things that we could put, next to it in the sentence. We have definitely the subject, and there are direct and indirect objects, and there are modifiers and verbs and adverbial clauses and participles and some things that are called complement in English grammar. And so it feels rather complicated. And when you think about, I prepared the slides on the plane, so I couldn't make them as colorful as all other presenters, but I hope it's okay. So the question is, how do you actually mark all these and in your language, and how you fit all this together? And when I was in high school, I knew that there's a subject, and then there's a verb, and there's an object, and that pretty much was it. That's all I knew. But I grew up since then, and I learned that, well, sometimes it's much harder to tell the subject from the object that I might think. And we heard the first talk, and we know about the quirky subjects now, and there are ergative verbs where, like in English, the same thing. I mean, basically, it's if I say Bill cooks the egg, or egg cooks for 10 minutes, I mean, the same thing that's happening. The egg is there in the boiling water, but in the first sentence, the egg is the subject, and in the second sentence, somehow the egg becomes the object. The other way around. Which is weird. So from this point of view, I mean, it's I think the ergative languages make more sense, at least if you do have the verbs like that are ergative, because then, at least I mean, in an ergative language or active ergative language, the would be marked the same in both of those phrases. So this is kind of like a decision you have to make for your language. Then I learned about verb valency, which pretty much says that certain verbs have to have certain arguments, and sometimes it's objects that they have to have, but sometimes it's I mean, on the table is well, it's not a depending on the language, it could be an object, or it could be something else. But you cannot say things without it. I mean, you cannot say I put it. It sounds weird in English, not in other languages. Or you cannot say I put. So at this point, the train of thought goes, okay, fine. If we just have verbs with certain valency, and there are subjects that have to just follow them. There are objects that just have to follow them. That we don't have to do much to mark them, because I mean, basically know what will happen after the verb and in which order. So we could just use some kind of oblique case or something. And I'm still hoping to make language like that. But it's there are some problems with it. Well, first of all, I mean, it's a great. But when you think about it, since you cannot, at least in English, you cannot just say I put. That sounds weird. You could reuse the same word in for different values. So you can say that, I mean, I put means something like I put something down, for example, in your language. So one word could be used, could have different meanings depending on the arguments it has. Unfortunately, the valency tends to be expanded or reduced sometimes in languages. It's just kind of natural process. And this is something that you either want or you don't want to take into account when you're building your language, because, I mean, if you hope that people will start speaking it, some ones do, then, I mean, they will, some natural processes will occur to your constructed languages. And, I mean, if you do not kind of, you know, build enough safeguards or give it enough slack in terms of, you know, when people make mistakes when they speak your language, or if you do not allow for some natural processes to happen, then your language may not be as viable. So from this point of view, I mean, like you can say I walk, but walk doesn't really have any objects. But at some point, people started saying I walked that path or I walked that road, right? Yeah. So suddenly the word walk now has a direct object. Anyway, so now we have this this verb, and we have all this direct versus indirect objects versus adverbial modifiers versus complements. And during the first talk, we saw how Sven struggled with just, you know, direct and indirect objects, but there's much more to it, and I think when you start looking at different languages and how they treat direct, indirect objects, and how, you know, you will see that the same verb, or translated to different languages, in the same situations, different languages just, you know, make very different grammatical decisions. So let's say that. I tried to have some examples, just taking them from English, but these are random examples. I mean, you probably can come up with better ones. It's just, you know, 5 or 6 words that came to my mind when I was preparing that. What I'm trying to do here is kind of, you know, think, okay, I build my language and I have those verbs in my language. How do I make those decisions about what kind of arguments they will have? So if I have an obey, it's in English it requires a direct object, right? Obey someone. But in many languages, the object will come in dative, which kind of makes sense because you don't really you kind of obey to someone, right? It's more like you give something to someone, right? Closer meaning to that. You give them your actions, you can say. When you rely on someone, right, it requires this on, which, I mean, you could just, I mean, when you think about it, if I rely on you, you could treat it as a direct object, right? On the other hand, rely has something to do with lie. And in terms of you, if I rely on you, that pretty much means that you support me. Like if I rely on something, it supports me, right? So again, we are talking about some natural processes here in languages. If I mean, you could have a word that has a meaning, you know, to be supported by something, or to rely on something, or lean on something, right? And then with time, that becomes, that gets a different meaning, meaning to rely on something in terms of relying on somebody to do something for you, for example. But the preposition stays, right? So the meanings drift, but you know, the pattern of usage stays the same, and that's sometimes why we get this weird prepositions where we may not expect them when we think about it semantically. We speak, I mean, speak is not really a transitive, or you can say speak about something, right? But it's not really a transitive verb. But you can speak English, or you can speak French. And so what is it? I mean, is it the direct object? I don't think so. What case do I put it in? Remember, I mean, you can, next conference you can come to me and say, remember me? Of course I remember you, right? But if you say in many other languages, then you would say something like, remember of me, right? And again, there's a good reason for that when you think about it, because it really means, do you remember something about me? And something of me, right? So it's more like a partitive construction. Depending on how you treat it, right? So one language may treat it one way, the other language may treat it a different way. And now there's a nice progression. I mean, in some languages you chase a bus, right? But you can also say run after it, right? And the bus, which is a direct object, I mean, you really want to get to it. This is where your action is directed. Suddenly, it's. I mean, you can think of it as a locative, right? Because you run behind it. Depends on your point of view. I mean, you can hit forcefully, and forcefully is a verb, right? Or with force, and then I mean it's a direct object, right? It's using force, right? With a magic force, then clearly means using something. Right? When you say punch someone in the nose, I mean, it's not really a location in the nose. And so on and so on. I mean, I thought for about 10 minutes I'd put those, but I think, especially people who know many languages will quickly, you know, come up with dozens and dozens of examples where arguments of a verb are put in the different prepositions. Sometimes they're treated direct objects, indirect objects. Sometimes they are treated like the verbal modifiers, and they may even become adverbials. So it's illogical. I mean, you can find logic in it, right? But a posteriori, you can find logic. But if the pattern of usage was different, you probably could find different logic in it as well. And if you just not pay much attention to it in your conlang, and then somebody comes and tries to learn it, they might speak to you and you may not understand what they're saying at all. I know it by as a fact because my children sometimes, I mean, they're talking in Russian to me, but they're using the patterns that are English-based because they grew up in the United States, and I have to, I'm like, what are they saying? So then I go translate this word to English, then I understand what they're saying. But without this word-to-word translation, it's very hard to get. So we don't have to copy our conlangs and matlangs, and it's dangerous, and we have to be creative and do something about it. So what do we do? Dictionary approach, definitely. This is, I mean, I talked online, in person to some conlangers, and I asked this kind of questions to them. in terms of, well, how do you deal with this? And some of them wouldn't even get the question because they say, oh, it's defined in the dictionary and that's it. You don't have to do anything about it. So that's definitely a very viable approach. But you have to be careful because you have to, every time you introduce a new verb in your language, you have to put it in the dictionary and document carefully what arguments it takes. And you also have to kind of, really, well, you don't have to be consistent, but it's nice when your language is consistent. So you may want to review other verbs you already have in your language and decide, what class it belongs to, or, this kind of thing, what other verbs it looks like if it has the same root as some other verb, you may want to give it the same arguments, or if it's constructed morphologically the same. The one language that I definitely want to mention here is Loglan, which is supposed to be very logical. So the only way they could figure out how to be logical is to really define, every word is a predicate there, and and it defines its arguments. So some of them have one argument, some of them have two, and so forth. And I think right now they came to 9 arguments for the word ticket. So they all traveled here, and the ticket could be from, I probably will go miss something out of those 9. From somewhere to somewhere, going, using some mean of transportation, going through something, arriving for whatever reason. I remember the last one was the class we travel, like I travel first class. Which again, when you think about it in English, it's to me it's a case of what preposition you give to I travel first class. There's no preposition, and it looks like just, like the English just looked at it and said, well, we can't figure anything out, but let us leave like that. So you have to remember all 9, and if you just want to use the first, the third, and the 9th, then you have to say special words which indicate which of the arguments you do use. So this is kind of, when you learn this, it's lots of work as well. And the problem with it, as I already mentioned, is that when some natural shifts occur and you just need to add an argument, right? When you speak and you suddenly realize that, well, we need another argument that is not, that wasn't foreseen by the creators of the language. What do? Do you just stick it at the end or something? How do you indicate that this is really the meaning you wanted to give it? And nice thing about it, if your verb is rich and if the class of your verb is really indicated by the prefixes and suffixes it has, they could also indicate what arguments it takes. Case-based approach. This I've seen a lot as well, where people just go and define like 20 cases for their languages. This is very popular. Or 30 cases, and they say, okay, fine, for every situation, I'll find the right case for it. Or maybe I'll find 2, and then we could use either that or that. There are still some borderline cases or usage scenarios where you do struggle with, or do just, when you say, yeah, travel first class is here, or elect someone president, again, what case you put president in. Most of you will probably answer me, and I can take a poll, write things down, and I'm pretty sure that the votes will differ. This is, again, if you have one conlanger that, that like has a has a language with 10 cases, and then you look at the other that has 25 cases, right? Somehow those 25s need to map to those 10, right? In terms of, there is this special case for a special situation that the other command line does not have. So how do you map those? And again, the mapping, I mean, you ask different people and you get different mappings. So, so cases help, but when you have borderline cases, they pretty much send you back to the dictionary approach. You have to document those. Well, you can just define a couple of cases and then define an oblique case and say everything else falls there. Works beautifully. As I said, I still want to create a language that's, that goes with that. You're at the end of the road in terms of, I mean, if you really want to, clarify the meaning, you can use an adverb next to, that. Like if you don't have a locative and you just use the oblique case for that, you can say, I put this table. But is it on the table or under the table? Well, you could use an adverb and say, make it on and put it up on the table. Then it's more clear. Well, already Esperanto had this yeah that pretty much meant, oh, I don't know what preposition to put here, but you understand, right? Now, there are languages that use nouns and only nouns, and I think the language that is called all noun was, at least that was the first one I learned, and I was fascinated by it. There's also the episode in Star Trek where they talk about a planet with a language where instead of I love you, they say I Romeo, you Juliet, or the other way around. And you really have to know not just the language, but the history and the culture to understand what they're saying.
Shaka when the walls fell. There you
go.
Shaka when the walls fell.
Yeah. Okay. So instead of carrying a dictionary with you, you actually have to carry an encyclopedia, which is fine because it all fits in a microchip. But it's actually a very beautiful system, and instead of one word that says the verb like hunt or love or whatever, you come up with this set of roles that define the situation. But in the end, it works very beautifully. Again, I was somewhat. I mean, when I first learned about this idea, I looked at the language that is called all noun. I was very excited. Unfortunately, I think all noun was kind of dropped and never developed it fully. But I actually don't know of a language that really developed this idea of roles. Maybe I should create one. Maybe somebody knows.
Tomorrow.
Well, okay. Great. And again, I mean, if you you don't have to memorize too many roles for every verb because you could use catch-all roles like time, location, or things like this, or even patient if it's really. So now here's my little contribution to that. Maybe I wasn't that original, but for my language, I decided to just use verb combinations. So what we have here is that, if you really have like a direct object, which means that the object is completely inactive, doesn't do anything, and your action is with this object, then definitely we use a direct object. But if we have a more complex situation, even slightly more complex, that usually means that there are several actions going at the same time or one following the other. And here are some examples, and actually this is exactly how my language, which is on that door, would say it. I mean, if I give you a book, I mean, give a book, the book is the direct object, but you already becomes, I mean, my language doesn't have indirect objects. You actually are an actor that is performing some other action. You take the book from me. So you have to have, I tried different, looking at different situations, I translated large passages of text. Works very well for me. So this, since I didn't want to make this language of mine Indo-European, I could do anything I want. And so this is what I did. And then if you take this approach, you have to have good means to link two actions together. And because when you say give a book, you take the book, you have to put it in one sentence, and you have to somehow link the two verbs. Basically, I give and you take, or I tell a story and you listen to a story. So that drove me to the control structures where you have several verbs in the sentence, and actually, you kind of, make a subordinate clauses. I was very excited, to go in that direction, because I always, it always seems to me that if you say something like, a running boy and a boy who is running, right? It's the same thing, right? But in the first case, you don't really have a subordinate clause that is clearly delimited, and in the second case, you do. So it would be nice to kind of merge those two and make it more seamless. At least, my aesthetic sense was telling me so. But let's look at subordinate clauses a little bit. So we have pretty much we could have a subordinate clause for any term in a sentence. Even a subject, which doesn't occur too often in English, but you can. Object, definitely, I know something. I know languages, or I know that whatever. So at this point, it becomes a subordinate clause. You can modify. You can have an adverbial, which is expressed as a subordinate clause, and so forth. And what you have to do in this case, you have to link the two together. And when you link those, that pretty much means that there is something in the main sentence that is also placed some part in the subordinate clause. So if you modify something, it's usually the word you modify that becomes the subject of the subordinate clause, right? A boy that is running, okay, the boy is running, right? If I see a boy that is running, the boy is an object in the main sentence, but it's a subject in the subordinate clause. Well, basically at this point, in your language, you have to answer those questions, like how often do you use the subordinate clauses? Are they always clearly delimited? Do you use a word like which that starts a clause, or a conjunction like that, or something like this? and if you use them a lot then you probably have to come up with something that is not too cumbersome and clumsy, because I mean, if in every sentence you say there will be a couple of those words which, that sounds you better make it short. I was amazed when I first learned that in French you use que all the time, and sometimes you like every other word in your sentence is que. But I don't speak French, so I don't insult your ears with my pronunciation. So you could use the word which or whatever else, I mean, you choose for your language. You can use passive, right? So the boy that is running, or God forbid, ran over. Right, so use the passive, and this allows you to keep kind of, this rule that that your main word is a subject of the subordinate clause. In English, you have this weird way of saying something with leaving a preposition hanging in the end, like you should never. What was this? You should never end your sentence preposition with.
Yeah, preposition is a horrible thing to end a sentence with.
Yeah, there you go. I tried to make it sounding even worse. So there are lots of ways to do that, and also in English there are those beautiful constructions that are called control verbs and raising verbs. So what happens here actually is that you take the subject of the main sentence, main clause, and that becomes the subject of your subordinate clause, in this case used as an object. Or you could take an object of the main clause and then becomes the subject of the subordinate clause. So when I say I want you to know that really means that this you, I don't want you I want the action to happen, right? So really you stands here even grammatically it's the object of want, but actually it's not. Semantically it's not. It's the subject of this subordinate clause. Or I expect you to know that, right? I don't expect you. I'm looking at my watch saying I expect you. I expect the action from you. The raising verbs, do the other thing. They actually take. That's what is a semantically the subject of the subordinate clause, and it becomes the subject of the main clause, even though it's not. Question. So you could try to use this kind of structures that they are fun, and I saw people use them in their comments without actually realizing that they're just copying English. But there's lots of possibilities here in terms of you can come up with different schemes to do the same thing. The main thing to remember is that, okay, fine, I'm using subordinate clauses, and this is how I link them to the main sentence. You probably want something to be able to say something. I want to go somewhere, or I want to do something, which is really the subject is shared between the want and the go, or the want and the do, right? Although, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, if your verbs are really morphologically rich, and you can just put, I mean, instead of saying I want to go somewhere, you can just put go in the right form. Then maybe you can avoid using this kind of structures. When you talk about object control and raising, which is, I mean, you take the object of the main sentence and becomes the subject of the subordinate. This is less frequent. I mean, English uses it a lot, but other languages don't. And I still have 5 minutes. And I mean, it's a decision of, I mean, you can decide whether you want to use it in your command or not, again, depending on how often you want to use this kind of structures. Now, what's interesting is that in English, the controlled verb is not inflected, but actually, in some languages it is, and it makes sense to put it in different forms, because sometimes it, you know, like in this example here, I'm glad to see you. I saw you. That made me glad, right? So this, I mean, the seeing came before becoming glad. And when I say expect something to be done, that really means that I expect now and something will be done later. So, so in English does not make any distinction here, but it actually makes sense to make a grammatical distinction. Again, my language does.
I've seen the example about hunting for rabbits.
Yeah.
How do you say, I tried to hunt for rabbits but was unsuccessfully?
Well, you say I tried, right? And you wanted the trying to result in hunting, right? So you link the trying and the hunting, right? And you can make this link between the two to be as rich as you want, right? So you may say that I tried first, and then comes the hunting, or you may say I'm trying and the hunting at the same time, but one is the result of the other. And when you say, I mean, if you put the unsuccessful, I'm not sure. I would just say that I was also being unsuccessful at the same time. But what I'm trying to say is that there are several actions going on here at the same time, and there are interesting relationships between them, right? I tried to do something, and what I tried to do was to hunt, right? So there's like object of trying was to hunt, and when I hunted, I wasn't successful, right? So actually, I did 3 things, not at the same time, but in some succession, and there's an interesting relationship between those 3 things.
All right, so I was wondering, I know you mentioned before, but I saw this is the end of your slide. Do you actually have any examples from your language that you can show us right now? But especially, like, for example, I wanted to see some of these where they were doubly inflected.
I'm not sure if the example I have here is complex enough, but the way the language works is, you know, there's like a chain of words, and each next word is linked to the previous one, and then, I mean, the chain may be broken, and when you start again, you repeat one of the roots that was here. So like this repeating that root here makes a link between the two, like it's shown here. So what you say is, I And then this is word for say, so I'm saying, and this is a word for this, so with the U it becomes an object. So I'm saying this, and then you can say, which references this say here, so you don't reflect it anymore, it's been reflected once. And this is the ton is the word for here, so you add this little t at the end to indicate that this action is the result from this one. Okay, and then you say you, and this again, this references that because you're repeating the root. So so basically, what's you know, if you just translate it to English, you say I say this, say to here, you hear.
Oh, okay.
And but this T is not the only link. There are other links, and you can weave pretty interesting you know, combinations with, because you're not really that much. I mean, you're not trying to kind of put this all in a tree-like structure, but you just, you know, you say something, and then if you need to add to it, you say a little more using the repeating the roots from what you just said. So you actually express yourself with those little phrases like this. And then first you just say, I say this, and then you say, well, I say for someone to hear, and then you specify who is hearing, right? So you can just kind of build on top of that, add a little more, then add a little more, and add a little more, until your meaning is perfectly clear. So this is how the language works. I translated fairy tales and stuff like that. It works fine for me.
Did you have a look at serial verb constructions in Chinese? Because it looks exactly the same.
Yeah, I know that Chinese uses some of that, but except that, I mean, Chinese doesn't really inflect
No, not
words
at all.
Yeah, so there's. I thought that by actually, you know, making this relationship between different actions more explicit, you gain a lot, and you don't have to use as many words or remember as many constructions as Chinese uses.
Oh, actually, I have one more. Another one that came to mind, I can't remember if you already said this in an email, but have you heard of Gary Shannon's Soaloa?
No. Sorry.
That's one I look up. That's the one where it comes in. Does anybody remember Soaloa? It comes in like triads, right? And every single verb is intransitive. And so you have to chain them along in such a way so that everything gets tagged with some sort of intransitive verb, even the transitive and non-transitive ones. Really, nobody remembers this but me?
Tomorrow
Okay, any more questions from you? And no online. If you're listening online, you can ask a question anytime. But anyway, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you.